Speaking first, we have Moshe. Speaking second, we have Batsayan. And speaking third, we have Benji. And Moshe will do the reply. In opposition, we have Wales. Speaking first, we have Ellen. Speaking second, we have Karen. Speaking third, we have John. And Ellen will do the reply. And we are Irene McGrath from Scotland, Jan Tulis from the Czech Republic, and Neha Prakash from Singapore. Okay, ready to go? It therefore gives me much pleasure to invite Moshe to open the case for the proposition on the motion, whatever it is, this House would cease the use of detention without trial in the war on terror.
In Afghanistan, a number of years ago, a group of international aid workers were taken into custody by the United States Army that was stationed in that country, under the suspicion that they were somehow affiliated with a terrorist organization. These aid workers were shipped off in an anonymous plane to the island of Guantanamo, where they were held for a number of years without any trial, without any rights, until finally their story reached the press and they were released. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot allow this kind of situation to occur in our society. We believe that we need to seize the use of detention, etc., etc. We recognize an extremely important problem in status quo today. And that problem is that innocents, people who have not yet been proven guilty, are locked away in jail without a trial, without representation, without any form of protection, and in many cases, they never see the light of day again. The equation, ladies and gentlemen, of this debate that we recognize is basically weighing two values one against the other. On the one hand, we have the importance of human rights, the basic values and democratic ideals that our society is founded upon. And on the other hand, we have a single tool, only one tool, that is used in the preemptive attempt to stop terror. And we're going to prove to you throughout today's debate why our human rights and the ideals of our society must triumph over this one tool. We will be presenting you with three levels of analysis to back up this statement. The first level is the importance of human rights in our society and exactly how detention violates these basic rights. The second level of analysis that I will also be presenting is basically an in-depth explanation of what this detention is, how it works, and why we really don't need it that much. And finally, the third level of analysis that will be presented by Batsayan is an extensive analysis on the harms of detention, exactly why we cannot allow such a monstrous, and I'll say that word, monstrous tool to exist in our society. So before I do that, let's quickly move on to define the terms of these motions. When we say detention without trial, what we mean is incarceration by a government body, such as the police or the army, without a legal judicial process for an indiscriminate length of time. The war on terror is fairly common sense, the global struggle against terror as it is carried out by the governments and armies of the world. Finally, let's just explain practically what we're proposing here today. We propose that we treat terrorist suspects like any other criminals in our society. That means they cannot be held for more than 24 hours without a charge being brought against them, which is currently what is going on. We must award these suspects a trial and a lawyer as we do with any other criminal. And finally, we'd also like to stress that if you can prove that these suspects are a danger to society, no thank you, and if you release them, they might do harm, then you can keep them in custody until the end of the trial, until a trial date. All right, so now that we've cleared up the terms of this motion, let's move on to the argument. I'll begin by explaining the value of human rights and how detention really violates them. Now, freedom of movement, bodily integrity, and most importantly, the idea that people are innocent until proven guilty. These are all basic rights and basic values that all human beings have inherently. They cannot be taken away. No, thank you. The only way society recognizes to establish guilt and therefore justify the removal of these rights is a trial, ladies and gentlemen. These trials are essential. One moment, ma'am. The tool of a trial is essential in order to stop abuse and exploitation of the people by those in power. Please.
That's just not true. We take away rights all the time, such as restricting freedom of movement when it's in our interest to protect people to do so.
Thank you. Yes, of course, but we only put someone in prison and don't let them out again after they've had a trial. If they're going to kill somebody tomorrow, if they're on the way to blow up a bomb, we'll arrest them and put them in prison until they can have a trial. We're not talking about direct danger here. To quickly move along, just to stress what I've just said, in no case in our society, not in the case of murderers, not in the case of serial killers, not in the case of rapists, do we forego this matter of a trial, no matter how dangerous these individuals might be. However, in society today, we are allowing many innocents to be rounded up and sent off to jail without any real justification. This is called detention. And let me just explain for a moment how this process works. If any official, they can be a policeman, they can be a private in the U.S. Army, it can be pretty much anybody with authority. If they have the desire to put someone in prison without time limits, without a lawyer, without hope, then they can do so, as long as they use the word terrorist when they're justifying it. Suspected terrorist, affiliate with terrorists, relative of terrorists. No, thank you. Any of these will allow a person to be thrown into jail for a long time. And a classic example of this is a situation that occurred in Afghanistan, similar to the one I brought forth earlier on. What happened there was that neighbors who had personal grudges against each other would report the person that they felt that they had grievances against to the United States Army, that they were suspected of terrorist activity, and the United States Army would toss them into jail because if you're suspected of terrorism, you simply don't need a trial.
On that point.
No, thank you. Another example of this occurred in Israel, and there are many more, but this one is simply illustrative. A falafel seller in the Old City had a relative who carried out a suicide bombing attack. Now, the police immediately zeroed in on him because he was related to this person, sent him off to jail with no proof, with no trial, and he stayed there for a year, an innocent man with a family waiting for him outside. We can't allow these things to happen. And we have to ask the opposition, why, if in no other case in society do we allow such violations of rights, do we allow them as long as the word terrorist exists in the sentence? And we don't believe that's okay. Please.
Because we believe that the situation of terrorism is different to any other. Because it's like one attack on one person is an attack on everyone. And it's so important that we protect people and we can forgo rights in the situation.
Thank you. Okay, why is terrorism so much worse, ladies and gentlemen, than a serial killer? Why is terrorism so much worse than a child killer, ladies and gentlemen? All of these are extremely disgusting violations, and yet we still award these people their rights. Now to move on to the second argument of today, the lack of the need for detention. And this is fairly simple, so I'll just lay it out. We only use detention when we lack proof that would condemn these people in a trial. Therefore, as I said at the beginning of my speech, we're not debating about a terrorist on the way to an attack, because him we can arrest under status quo. Detention is only a preemptive method. No, thank you. And we have many other preemptive methods, ladies and gentlemen. We have espionage, which is the reason that 97% of terrorist attacks in Israel are stopped before they ever get to the media, and that's why we don't hear about them, because espionage has stopped them. We have reliable collaborators who work for us. We have wiretaps, we have stakeouts, and we have arrests. All of these methods are extremely effective and can be used to pinpoint terrorists before they carry out attacks. We should be using these methods instead of the widespread knee-jerk method of detention, in which case anybody who might have the label of terrorist floating sort of unclearly over his head, we grab them and thrust them into prison. We'd also like to stress, just quickly, that when we have this easy, simple tool of detention, it often causes us to circumvent these more moral and these, in the end, more effective methods. Because why bother wiretapping a suspected terrorist house if you can simply take him and throw him in jail and therefore solve the problem? So we believe that when the tool of detention exists, it really undermines these other more legitimate tools. The bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is what have I proven to you today? I've shown you why the equation before the House today is human rights, the morals of our society, innocent until proven guilty, freedom of movement, freedom of everything, really, freedom to not be in prison, against this one single tool that is not needed in the war on terror. And therefore, human rights must come first. Thank you.
opposition side of the table then. The House is delighted to welcome Ellen to open their case.
Ladies and gentlemen, we had a very emotive start from Russia about innocent people being locked away, and I can't resist combating that with iron. Innocent people being killed on buses and trains in London because one of the bombers had been released by the police. They'd been forced to release him on lack of evidence previously. And we think these innocents are just as important than and their rights are being violated to a much bigger degree. The right to life is being taken away from them. They are living in fear. And that is why today we need to keep every possible method we have to stop this from happening. And that is why we oppose this motion today. Under the case line that without adequate protection from terrorists, this policy helps terrorists to achieve their purpose. And we're arguing this under three main arguments today. Firstly, I'm going to explain to you why detention without trial is needed to protect people. And I'm going to also look at why national security is far more important than civil liberties in this circumstance. And my partner Kerith will go on to explain to you about how this policy actually achieves the purpose of terror. No, thank you. So let's first look at what we heard from the proposition today. We heard the example of Afghanistan, where aid workers were shipped off to Guantanamo Bay because some neighbours had come along and said, terrorists over there, hurry up, quick, let's get them. Well, that's not the system we're advocating. We believe there are problems in the system when things like that happen, but we think, on the whole, police have to consider their public appearance. We don't think Guantanamo Bay is the best piece of advertising that the American system has. We don't think it looks particularly good for them. And we think they want to avoid these situations, and in order to do so, they have to have some basis for arresting people. No, thank you. Even if it's not to justify, enough to justify keeping them under the current, under the propositions model. We also say that 24 hours, when you treat terrorists like every other subject, and you treat them for 24 hours, that's completely unreasonable. There's no way you can prove enough to have to keep a suspect in prison in that short a time. No, thank you. And I'll explain why this is for the nature of terrorism in my arguments. So let's look at what we heard in their arguments today. We heard about the importance of human rights. And we quite like human rights, funny enough, too, on the opposition. But we don't agree that they're absolute. We want the proposition to prove to us why the right to freedom of movement, which they agreed isn't absolute, we think that's quite a big factor when you're talking about a prison sentence, why these rights are so absolute and why we can never take them away when it is in the benefit of the population. No, thank you. And I'm going to tell you why we can. Because when you do this, you protect the most people. And when you compare the balance of rights, then you're saving the most people when you restrict someone's freedom for a while, or when you let thousands of people die, or hundreds of people die, and millions of people feel unsafe and like they cannot trust their government to protect them. So we also were questioned, why do we treat terrorism differently? And this is because terrorism is a unique crime. The purpose of terrorism is merely to create terror, and the murders and deaths that result are a tool to create terror. No, thank you. It exists to disrupt society, and it harms everyone in that society. And Kerith will come on to talk about these dangers more in his argument. But we say that it is such an abhorrent thing and so dangerous that we need new measures to deal with it. That we need all the systems we've got, and we believe that maybe they should be stronger, because we still think there are problems under the current system. So, no, thank you. We also hear that there are alternatives, such as espionage, that should be used instead of detention. We say no, these are used before detention to get people in there in the first place. We quite like them, but we believe they complement the status quo, which the proposition is misunderstood. No, thank you. So, we believe, let's go on to look at our arguments today. Why do we need this detention without trial to protect people? And this is because criminal courts rely on the principle of beyond reasonable doubt. You need a great deal of evidence to get someone to a criminal trial. And what this does is create an extremely high burden for the prosecution, which we think is quite important in most cases. But this burden causes a problem for the police. It causes even more of a problem with terrorist subjects. And this is because the way terrorists operate. I'll tell you in a moment. Well, the way terrorists operate is they're underground, they have a system of cells in which no one is able to communicate with everyone within one system. They use aliases and codes to cover their tracks. And we see this in Al-Qaeda, where use of Islamic aliases and communicating through codes based on the Quran, as well as a terrorist network of cells, we see that it's extremely difficult to find this information in the time we have at the moment. Yes.
Well, obviously we have enough information to have arrested them and put them into prison. So if we already know that they're terrorists, then why can't we just wait until a trial?
Thank you.
Unless we're operating under our racism.
There's a lot. Now, this is another situation where the proposition have misunderstood the status quo. What happens is a moment they need a basic suspicion. They need something, a real suspicion, not some neighbour, that there is a possibility that there's a terrorist act being committed. And then, before they can keep them in trial longer than 24 hours, they have to get a judge to pass something to say that it can continue, to say that there is a reasonable, no thank you, there is a reasonable amount of suspicion, and there's enough evidence to keep them in a little bit longer. But what the proposition wants to do is increase this burden all the way up to the level needed for a criminal trial. And we say that it makes it harder, especially when you want to tackle leaders or people higher up in the organisation who can cover their tracks by appearing anonymous to the people who actually commit the acts. Because if you let these people out in the open, it's easy for them to disappear through their many contacts. It's easy for them to pass on that the particular operation needs to be altered to escape the police's eye. No, thank you. So, we saw this in a recent debate about the British government raising the limit to 90 days for how long you could detain a terrorist subject. And it was revealed during this speech that during the trial of the bombers that committed the acts on the 7th of July, only just happened because they got the information in they needed to keep them in long enough for a trial 1 day before the deadline expired. So we believe that the system is only just enough now, and what the proposition want to do is undermine a system that is barely coping. And now we're going to look at our second argument about how, no thank you, the current system, about how national security is more important than civil liberties. And we say that the government has to choose between these on a daily basis. So we accept that when national security is more important, it's okay for the government to curtail our rights. We see that no right's absolute because different circumstances alter their importance. And we say that the unique circumstances we are in a state of war with terrorism. That's why we believe the motion says war on terror. And we see this with NATO, such as the Article 5. An attack on one is attack on all. This has been invoked once, ladies and gentlemen, and that was after the terrorist attack on September the 11th, 2001. So we see that the international community recognises that the war on terrorism is like any other war, and in war priorities change. It's more important to protect people and to make people feel safe, so that terrorism doesn't allow to achieve their goals of a sense of fear, because everyone feels they could be the next target, and society turns in on themselves because they can't trust anyone. So when we have the government needing to protect citizens from widespread murder, where hundreds of people are killed, which we say is very different to a serial killer. Someone doesn't see a serial killer on the news 500 miles away and think, oh good God, I'm next. What they see is someone causing a problem somewhere else. And while they don't like it, it doesn't cause the fear that terrorism instills. Because terrorism is a group of organised people working together to bring you and your society down and to hurt you. And that's why it's so different, because it's happened in the whole system and trying to harm them. That's why it's more important than someone's right to freedom of movement, and that's why we need the status quo to remain or to become even stronger. So we beg to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, right, moving back to the proposition then. The House is delighted to recognise Patsy and
those who sacrifice a little liberty for a little security deserve neither liberty nor security. Benjamin Franklin said this quite a while before he was put on the $100 bill, and we feel that this is a very important statement that should still guide us today in the struggle, in these days where really liberty and security seem to have come to a clash, when people get a little too excited and jump to conclusions and declare wars all the time, and we feel that this is the sentence that really should guide us today. I'm going to be talking about the harms that are threefold. I'll be discussing that in my point. But first I'd like to get to a little bit of refutation, because we heard a very frantic opposition that was telling us that really we're in a very dire state. And we have a few problems with what they've heard. First of all, we heard that the difference between terrorism and a normal crime, because most challenged them to show us one. They said it because it harms a lot of people. And we don't really see the link. We're missing the analysis of that link, of why is it that it threatens more people suddenly justify losing all our moral standards and throwing them to jail. We see this as somewhat of a utilitarian approach, where they're saying, well, this will save more people, so we're going to just throw them away. No, thank you. And we tell you that in no democracy in the world do you have that sort of approach, where you say, well, for example, in no democracy in the world do you come to a terminally ill patient and take his organs away because it will help more people. We don't think the more people is actually relevant, so we still are missing that analysis. And even if we had it, no thank you, we ask, when does it end? In two respects. First of all, when does it end? How long can you keep these people? Just forever? Is it 3 years? Is it 6 years? Is it an eternity? Because really, we've been hearing this, and oh, one day we'll be able to prove it. But we ask, what if you can't ever prove it? Will you keep these people in jail forever? Because Ellen made it sound like they're just going to wait till they have enough evidence. But really, that's not the situation. No, thank you. We see people waiting years and years on end without any. And we also ask, what does it end? Because Ellen told us that we have to do whatever it takes. And we say, and this sounds a little scary, what if you just kill them? Of course that is not what opposition meant, and we know it isn't. But then we ask, how is it they can say they will do whatever it takes, when clearly that is not a logical or moral thing to do? No, thank you. And then we heard this concept of, is 24 hours enough? And that we're elevating terrorists to criminal level. And we say, yes, of course we're doing that. We want to ask the opposition why terrorists have been downgraded in the first place, why they're being treated as subhuman, because we don't have to elevate them to, no, thank you. It's like the opposition are saying, we're going to elevate them to human beings now. Well, yes, of course we're going to do that, because that is exactly what they are. So we're told that, first of all, we say the first answer is if 24 hours aren't enough tough luck. That's how the world works. That's how our morals work. We furthermore say no, because we heard that, no thank you. We heard that this detention is only after espionage, and we say, great, if that is the case, then the espionage means you have some sort of information. It means you can, no thank you, take him to trial. And if you don't have any information, if you can't take him to trial, then clearly this is a racist decision. It is a random decision. And it furthermore lets us skip tools. Because if people know they can, in one moment, if they can detain someone without doing the espionage and doing all the research, then really they're skipping all the steps and using this tool because it is still legitimate. Yes?
In the status quo, it is not a dichotomy. There is not enough evidence for a trial and absolutely no evidence. People have suspicions and they act upon them. And we say that's good when terrorism is so harmful. And not just because it harms a lot of people, because it threatens the entire society.
So we say you have to have a little bit more. Having some suspicions isn't fair, because what you're saying is that they are guilty until proven innocent. They will sit in jail. They will sit in jail for months and years, until you have decided you've had enough time now, and now we're ready to go to trial. We don't accept this, that they are subhuman. We do not accept this, guilty until proven innocent. And we don't accept that you guys need a little more time. And as Moshe said, it's just a tool of convenience. It's not really the only tool. The last issue I'd like to get to, two more issues, I'm sorry, is this idea that we really heard a watered-down version. We didn't really hear what detentions happen, because we have told you, detentions happen also randomly, as we've given you the two examples of Afghanistan. And there's many times it happens racial profiling, and if not, then as we said, go to trial. And we also heard that these people can run away. And we say no, just like in every criminal trial, because these people are criminals, if you can show that they will run away, no thank you. If you can prove that they are a danger to society or that they will escape, you can keep them until the trial that you have set. The last issue is this idea of war. And we see this a lot, especially in the United States, where we declare war on drugs and war on terror. And I'll get to my point how really the word war just really legitimizes these other tools. But even if the word war were correct, in war we have rules. We have prisoners of war. No, thank you. We treat soldiers as they should. So if really we're in a war here, then the other team is, the other side, the terrorists, are the soldiers, and you have to treat them with some respect, even though you don't like them very much. And I can tell you that I don't. Still, you have to have some sort of respect. Even war has rules, because not all is fair in war. Now I'd like to get to my point. No, thank you. We have the harms that we are going to show today are threefold. First of all, the harm towards a detainee. We're going to show that besides the fact that he has completely lost all the rights of due process, which does not happen, and Moshe said, due process is never ever abolished in any other circumstance, and we still wait for the opposition to show us when it is. He has many other rights abused, and then we have, no thank you, we're going to talk about the harm towards the ethnicity of where this person comes from and towards the democratic world. So now let's talk about what happens to this detainee, because the lack of due process is only the beginning of the abuse of the human rights. These jails are off somewhere else. They're not in our backyard. They're not in our lovely places. They're not near the Pentagon. They're somewhere far off where we don't like to see them and we don't like to talk about them. What happens in these jails with no standards? We have torture, and if it's practices to simulate drowning for the people who are waiting there, if it's forcing them to throw up just out of torture, just until they give in, if it's sleep deprivation, if it's playing with the lights, if it's going on and off to merely make them completely crazy, if it's no thank you, if it's starvation, if it's detachment from family, because even though we might not like these people, I might not, they still are people that still have families, no thank you, and they're taken away, and they are denied the right that every other criminal in the world has.
Information.
No thank you. And of course, there is the violence and sanitation, which happens in all jails, but especially in this one. We have an incredible, and a lot of harms happening to this detainee, and we're waiting for why the harm of a maybe future, 1 minute, maybe future terrorist attack can justify all these harms, yes.
We're not defending the problems that happen within places like Guantanamo Bay. We're saying those are problems, but it's not, again, it's not a dichotomy between normal jail and Guantanamo Bay.
Okay, so we say, first of all, these jails, because you're really abusing due process, will not, and the fact is that these naturally happen like this, and nothing has happened to change them. So it's true that there might be a situation where there isn't, but the fact is, where there's no correlation, but the fact is that most of the time there is, and that there's no utopian, no due process, but very lovely jail. No thank you. And these harms do exist today. And so next harm, and we have two more harms that are widespread. The next one is towards the ethnicities. Because the fact is that terrorism is not a war, a normal war like we've seen. It's about information, it's about propaganda. And this policy creates living martyrs. Every guy who drove the car, or even didn't even drive a car, every guy who walked into an airport looking suspicious, who was crated off because there was not enough suspicion, is really now taken away and is a living martyr, which means people have rallied around the cause, and they've rallied against, they've created antagonism towards the Western hypocrites who love democracy so much, except when it comes to me. And we also see that these trials are very important. Because if the person will be innocent, then we're showing goodwill, we're showing honesty, we're showing there are actually democracies who actually care and want to get to the terrorists and not to everyone else. And if they're guilty, then we show that that shows everyone that what this person had done was wrong. A lot like the Eichmann trial, the Nuremberg trials, who were made on display for everyone to see. And these people were indeed guilty. And the last thing I want to get to is the fact that we are really harming ourselves, every democracy in existence who's actually using this policy. Because the only thing more important than human lives is humanity itself. That's what the House of Lords said in 2006 when they released with these terrorists who had who had killed people, and there was proof, but because there might have been torture involved in the obtaining of the information, release them. Because sacrificing our humanity is not allowed to, we cannot do it. And if we sacrifice humanity, we are telling the terrorists that they have won. Thank you.
Moving back now to the side of opposition, it's a pleasure to recognise the Harris to continue their case.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honourable jury. Today we're standing before you on the opposition side of the House, under the case line. Without adequate protection for terrorists, this policy will achieve the purpose of terrorists. And we've done so far under two main lines of argument. Firstly, why detention without trial is so important. Secondly, why national security is more important than civil liberties. And thirdly, I myself will be addressing what the policy will achieve the purpose on terrorists. But before I move on to my main point of argument, there's a lot of rebuttal which I'd like to make from the proposition House today. They've challenged us today to separate how terrorists are different from normal criminals. And Ellen did explain upon this, but I don't think they understood the whole analysis. So I'm going to go through it again, ladies and gentlemen. What we are saying, that terrorists are completely different to child killers or serial killers because they've got a goal. They're out to undermine the established order within society. They want to cause terror and fear within the society and overturn the established order and government that is in place. The terrorists are attacking the whole population. As Ellen said, no thank you, as Ellen said, they're not just Syrian killing people in one small part of a certain country, but they're attacking everyone. The fear is a mass spread one which follows the whole country. And this is why terrorists are different to normal criminals, and this, no thank you, and this is why they should be held without trial. They've also said that, no thank you, they've also said that how long are we going to specify we keep them in jail for? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're not just going to be going up and grabbing random people on the streets thinking, you're a terrorist, you're a terrorist, you're a terrorist. It's not like that. To be arrested in the first place, there's got to be evidence beyond reasonable doubt. And when this is, no thank you, and this means there is already a strong and substantial case of which is being compounded. The finishing touches are putting on it, which will allow these terrorists, who are in fact terrorists, to be put behind bars and protect the people of the society. No thank you. They've also said that we put forward the idea that 24 hours is not enough. And they said this is treating terrorists as subhuman. However, ladies and gentlemen, once these terrorists choose to remove other people's rights, or plan to remove other people's rights, then they do not deserve to have these rights themselves, ladies and gentlemen. If they want to plan to kill people and plan to remove people's basic human right, the right to life, then it is in our own interest to detain them without trial and to protect the people of, I'll take you in a moment, and to protect the people of society by allowing the evidence to be gathered while we prosecute them. Yes.
Sir, if as you claim, we only take these terrorists into custody when we have beyond reasonable doubt, then won't that beyond reasonable doubt allow us to keep them until the trial?
No. Because as you have shown us the proposition, in many cases, we only have 24 hours to compile this case, to take it to trial. There's no thank you. Within Britain, until the 42-day Detention Trial Act was passed, we only had 24 days, I think it was, where we could gather this evidence. And this is not enough. As Ellen showed in the first argument, there's underground networks, there's different codes used. No, thank you. It spans across continents, and it's hard for it's hard for any government or any police force to show when these governments have in fact the terrorists are in fact doing wrong.
Point.
No, thank you. The proposition have also said that we said that they may run away from the crime. They run away from the crime, and they said no. It's like all criminal crimes, and we're going to keep them. But this is not the case, as we do not have enough information at the current point to take the trial to court. So therefore, Therefore, we cannot hold them and just decline bail, as we do not have enough evidence. And this evidence is needed to prosecute these terrorists of the wrongs they are doing. Point. No, thank you. We've also heard today that we've put forward the idea that there's a war. It's a war on terror, and a war which we directly need to attack. And the proposition put forward the idea the war demands respect, and laws aren't lost in the war itself. And of course, we respect this on the opposition side of the House, as all wars have laws, ladies and gentlemen. But what laws within war does, it means that human rights can be lost. Freedom of movement can be lost. The right to life is even lost in certain wars, ladies and gentlemen, when you're defending yourself. And also, this is a war on terror, so we are removing the right for them to be detained without the trial, ladies and gentlemen. And this is important to maintain the status quo within society. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've told you, so I've rebutted all the points put forward themselves, and now I'd like to move on to my third most main substantive point of the art. No, sorry, there's some more rebuttal I've just found. There's so much going on here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm getting a bit angry that I need to concentrate on my rebuttal. So we've also looked at this idea that because we're condemning torture to take place, by condemning them, taking them into trial, into detention without trial, we're condemning torture. And this is not the case, ladies and gentlemen. Just because we're holding someone doesn't mean we're going to be playing waterboard with them later on in the afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is not, no thank you, this is not the case. We appreciate that rights can be removed, but the one right which cannot be removed in any situation is the right not to be tortured. And this is a right which Team Opposition is respecting today.
Right, sir.
No thank you. Now that I've got all my rebuttal out of the way and my head's a bit calmed down, I'm going to move on to my third main point of argument, which is why this policy achieves the purpose of terrorism, ladies and gentlemen. And we have to see exactly what terrorism is fact doing today in the world itself. Terrorism is exactly what it says on the tin, ladies and gentlemen. What it does, it's a tool to create a sense of terror within a state to achieve their own goals, the aim of overthrowing the established order. Death and destruction are used as tools by these terrorist groups. They're instruments used to create a terror and fear within society that will break down the norms of society and allow these terrorist organisations' goals to be achieved. And we've seen this with the terrorists in the United States and in Europe, where Islamophobia has come to the fore of society, ladies and gentlemen. And no, thank you. And at current, people are scared of what they're being told and have shown in the media. People are scared of where the next terrorism attack will come from and if it will affect them. Citizens want to feel safe within their own society and their own nation. And for this feeling to be achieved, this must be a level of trust and security within the government they are representing. Yes.
So what about the Muslim members of our society? Are they supposed to feel safe knowing that they could be thrown into jail at any moment?
Okay, well it's not, as we've just shown. We're not going to go around the street and be going, you're a Muslim, you're a terrorist. That's not the case. There has to be beyond reasonable doubt and evidence protected before these people are arrested. No thank you. We're not just arresting random people here. They're suspected terrorists who are in the process of going to trial. And this is a concept with the proposition seem to be mishitting today. No thank you. So, for this feeling to be achieved, there must be a sense of security and trust in the government. If we allow suspected terrorists to walk freely on the street, then this feeling of security and safety is lost. People are rather disillusioned with the government's attempt to hold national security. They see terrorist suspects opening freely, which creates this fear in society. A fear which is exactly what the terrorists want, ladies and gentlemen. However, as the opposition have shown, by the government showing a positive and strong front to these terrorists, such as the UK has done by only this year passing the 42-day detention order, which allows terrorist suspects to be held without trial for 42 days, a sense of trust and security has been put in the British people. They feel safe and, more importantly, hold trust within the government, upholding the established order, which is exactly not what the terrorists want to go on. But this trust does more so. It allows the government to do ordinary practices and be respected by the people. It allows norms of society to flourish and the established order to stand, breaking down the terrorists and their own goals, ladies and gentlemen. So, what have we told you on the opposition side of the House, ladies and gentlemen, today? Firstly, we have shown you why detention without trial is so vitally important to society and the way we live in the world today. Secondly, Eleanor again showed why national security and the rights of many is far more important than civil liberties. And thirdly, I have shown you by following the proposition's policy today, we are only going to serve the purpose of terrorists and may become terrorists ourselves. So for all these reasons, I beg you to oppose the argument today. Thank you very much.
House's great pleasure in recognising Benji to speak first.
Unfortunately, it seemed Team Wales is a bit confused, because what we heard here from the second speaker was that, well, we only bring terrorists we only arrest terrorists and hold them without trial once we have proof beyond reasonable doubt that they are terrorists. Now, first of all, not factually true. The cases we're talking about today are people who are held without trial when there is no proof that they've done it. And this is what that happens today on society. But more than that, ladies and gentlemen, if we have proof beyond any reasonable doubt that these people are terrorists, why on earth are we not then going to trial and trying them for being terrorists? The entire question of whether or not we should hold them without trial becomes irrelevant, because we can take them, try them, send them to jail, and then, you know, again, we're holding them, but with the trial. So the whole case really pretty much agrees with us, because they got up here and they said, we're only going to do this if we have proof beyond reasonable doubt. That's exactly what we're arguing here. No, thank you, ma'am. Because the fact is, any criminal, and what they don't understand actually, is any criminal, when you bring them and you arrest them, you have to go to a judge and say, look, we have this and this proof that this person probably did it. Therefore, we're then going to bring them to a trial and then prove beyond reasonable doubt. Therefore, no thank you. Their requirement that there be, you know, significant proof for someone before they come and be arrested is status quo. That's when you arrest someone for being a terrorist. That's not when you hold someone without trial. And I'm very sorry if Team Wales doesn't seem to understand this, ladies and gentlemen. Because if we have the proof, if we have proof beyond reasonable doubt that they actually did it, one sec, sir, then, well, we'll send them to trial and they'll go to jail. Yes?
When you're holding terrorists without trial in detention, you go to a judge and you ask permission for an extension of the time until you get the evidence.
But what? You just said we had the evidence. You said the only time we do this is beyond reasonable doubt. And more than that, you do that under any case, ladies and gentlemen. You go and you say, here, I have quite a lot of evidence that this guy did it. And then the prosecution and the defense lawyers then go and do their own I'm forgetting the word in English, investigation into the matter. And they basically go and they bring it to trial and they say, here's one side, here's the other side, let's prove it beyond reasonable doubt. Everything you're arguing is true to any other criminal. We bring reasonable doubt, no thank you, reasonable doubt to a judge. They say that we'll put him in jail. Ladies and gentlemen, this simply means Team Wales doesn't understand what this debate is about. No thanks, I just answered you. So ladies and gentlemen, 3 questions which I think are important, even though I think this debate doesn't really understand where it's going. So first question is, are we allowed to detain innocent people? Second question, are terrorists inherently different to other criminals? Because this was an assertion that we heard from, this is something that was said time and time again from this side. And finally, can we fight terrorism in other ways? So, are we allowed to detain innocent people? And let me stress here, when I say innocent people, I mean what everybody in society today accepts innocent. That every person in society is innocent until proven guilty. Meaning even the terrorists, if they did do something, they're technically innocent until we try them. But much more than that, ladies and gentlemen, we have people who are actually innocent. We have hundreds of people, no thank you, held who did absolutely nothing wrong. They haven't addressed this ever. No thank you. They said, well, we can just throw them in jail because, you know, it helps society. No, ladies and gentlemen, I can't throw people in jail because I think it might help society. We can't be a Stalinistic dictatorship which said, I'm going to throw hundreds of people in jail, you know, to keep calm. Let's keep the population down, you know. Let's keep everyone nice and calm. No, thank you. And, you know, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not what we do in society today. We don't hold people in jail until we have significant proof that they did something. And we certainly don't hold people in jail just because their neighbour said, I think this guy may have done something. No, thank you. We can't hold people in jail unless they're actually guilty. And they sort of agreed with us, because they said, well, you can't torture people unless they're, like, you know, we can't torture people, ladies and gentlemen. But then, if we're not allowed to torture people, because, ladies and gentlemen, this is going too far, this is just, no thank you, this is too much, and we can't use this to protect society, then why are we allowed to throw you in jail, keep you away from your family, and hold you alone? They either have to accept the fact that you can do, we don't really understand the difference between torture and holding someone in jail, no thank you, without any kind of difference. So ladies and gentlemen, you're not allowed to detain innocent people. They have rights. Are terrorists inherently, no thanks, different to others? So we heard an attempt at analysis on this side exactly why terrorists are different. So the first couple of things they said were slightly not really so deep. They said because they go underground and they have a chance to flee and they have very complex systems. But lots of criminals in our society today, have fairly complex crimes. No, thank you. No, thank you. Lots of criminals today don't want to get caught. Therefore, the crimes that they commit are generally fairly complex. And no, thank you, ma'am. Stop badgering, please. On the point when, at that moment when terrorists are fairly complex. So, ladies and gentlemen, criminals are fairly complex. And what we see, ladies and gentlemen, is that we didn't see any real difference between cell organizations inside a terrorist group and say, what criminals do, which is organise a few people, no thank you, together, who go and commit a crime. What the organised mob does, ladies and gentlemen, which is responsible for the vast majority of crime today, which is indeed ordering certain people, they have secret codes, it may not be based on the Quran, it may be based on Russian instead. But ladies and gentlemen, we simply have the same complexities here. And if they can run away, if you can actually prove to a judge, pre-trial, that someone is about to run away, you bring a case to the judge, we're holding these people, we don't yet have significant evidence, don't let him flee the country, don't let him flee, hold him, you can hold him under house arrest, you can hold him in jail, ladies and gentlemen. It's simply not true that we just allow them to flee the country. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, one second, we have the issue that they attack all society. Yes.
So you're fine about restricting people's movement, freedom of movement, and keeping them under house arrest, even though you're worried about keeping people completely innocent.
If you have a significant proof, like the police have spent a lot of time building up a case, proving, no thank you, something against this person, then yes, you can hold them. You don't have just those little 24 hours to build an entire case. No, the process starts before. You have to build up a case against the terrorist. When you have significant proof, you bring it to the judge, and then he does something about it. And at the same time, you can also say, you're right, this person might flee the country, let's keep him here, I won't grant him bail. So ladies and gentlemen, the final thing that we heard about this was that, well, they attack all society. But we never actually heard any link between the two, because the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, organised crime harms all of society. People feel threatened by the mob all over the place. It doesn't mean that we can start throwing the mob into jail all willy-nilly. But, ladies and gentlemen, more than that, it still doesn't prove anything. Just because there is a harm to society, and it might potentially harm people in the future, because Moti proved to you quite seriously that it was potential harm, a preemptive strike, we don't just get to throw people in jail. We don't get to throw innocents in jail in order to help all society. And finally, can we fight in other ways? And this is quite a small thing. Ladies and gentlemen, they never really got to the fact that we have espionage, that we have just normal series of arrests. And they never really explained to us why this wasn't enough. They said, yes, they can work together. We said, yeah, but we don't want them to work together. Because under our plan, we're not throwing innocent people in jail. Under your plan, they are. And ladies and gentlemen, most terrorist attacks today are stopped by these means. And they never really came to grips with the fact that using their plan really just circumvents these means because of lazy officials. So we're not allowed to detain innocent people. Terrorists are not inherently different to others. We can fight it in different ways. And really, Wales has missed the plot. Thank you very much.
Write that down.
And that is not something that we can accept on the proposition terms. And with that, I beg.
Right. Speaking third in opposition, the House is delighted to recognise John.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we've all got just a bit worked up about this. We've been throwing all these emotive examples around the room, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to look at the facts within this debate and show you why actually they fall on our side of the house. So we've been looking today and arguing on the basis that without adequate protection from terrorists, this policy actually achieves the aims of terror. We've looked at why detention without trial is needed to protect our people and the people of all society. How national security is more important than this particular civil right. And why actually, by ceasing the use of detention, it actually achieves the purpose of terror. To develop our case further, I'm going to look at 3 areas. I'm going to look firstly about, is terrorism different? Secondly, whether national security trumps this right. And thirdly, whether this is necessary. So let's go to this first area. Is terrorism different? Well, we believe that it is, ladies and gentlemen. Because terrorism is an organised and aggressive force which targets every single person of society. No thank you. It aims to use bombs and death to incite fear into every single person within society and every single person that exists in order to get their way. And we believe that this is very different compared to normal criminals, because they don't aim to achieve this, they just aim for other things. And we believe that as a result of this fear, ladies and gentlemen, it results in a breakdown of society, because everyone doesn't know who they can trust.
Sir.
No thank you. They can't trust the government, and they can't trust the people around them. They start to stereotype different groups in society, ladies and gentlemen, and marginalise them. No thank you. And we believe that actually it results in a breakdown of society which achieves the aims of terror. And we believe that normal criminals don't achieve this. And because terrorism is so different, because it leads to the breakdown of society and a culture in which we don't know who we can trust, we have to constantly look over our shoulders. No thank you. We believe that actually this policy is necessary and terrorism is different. Now moving on to my second point. Does national security trump this right? Well, the opposition have said we never sacrifice people's rights and no democracy in the world will do this. Well, we would like to say, welcome to the real world and welcome to international law. Yes, please.
We do sacrifice people's rights once we've proven that they're guilty with a trial.
No, we don't, ladies and gentlemen. We sacrifice people's rights every day. The role of the government is to find a balance between positive and negative liberty. They have to work out whether forcing people to go to, schools and have an education, restricting their movement, is a good thing or a bad thing. They make these choices every day. And one of the things, and international rights, no thank you, one of this right in particular, ladies and gentlemen, is something that's enshrined within international law, within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And within this charter, ladies and gentlemen, there is only one absolute right, one that can never be infringed. And that is concerning torture, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe that torture should never be used. However, in the example, in certain circumstances, such as war, which this is, ladies and gentlemen, and I will show you, these rights can be sacrificed and should be sacrificed. So, ladies and gentlemen, the fact is, we are fighting a war against terror. It is a war, ladies and gentlemen. The opposition have said, well, rules still exist in war. Well, rules exist in war in the basis that both sides follow them, ladies and gentlemen. And at the moment, there isn't this mutual side. If they're going to abuse people's rights, if they're going to adopt our people, ladies and gentlemen, in the name of terror, and instigate this fear among every single person in society, we feel, no thank you, that we are accepted. They raise this idea about prisoner of war, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that actually, prisoners of war are held without trial too, ladies and gentlemen. And so this is just another example, another precedent for why our side is right. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, by just simply restricting their freedom of movement until we can have enough information, until we can gather this information to put them to trial, it is the way of developing our case. No, thank you. They've talked about espionage, ladies and gentlemen, and how it's so amazing. Well, you believe that actually espionage is very subjective. It's useful, but subjective. It's a way that we can use, and many of these detentions are held on the basis of espionage, ladies and gentlemen. The fact is, we use this information, we use these tools in a combination of ways to ensure that our society is protected. And we believe that actually, when we're fighting such a war, when the other side doesn't follow any rules, doesn't follow or show any respect for humankind, we need to reserve every single tool possible to fight these people. No thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that actually, we need time to find the evidence. We need time to pull these charges together, time to work out, use espionage, and things like that to prosecute these people correctly. Yes.
Wouldn't you say stooping to the level of terrorism and employing racism is breaking down our society?
No, I would say actually, it's a way of unifying society, ladies and gentlemen. The fact is, we need to fight these people, and we can work, no thank you, it's only by banding together and working together as a society, ladies and gentlemen, and recognising that we need to sacrifice the rights of these people in order to, and allow the government to do this, in order to protect ourselves, that this can happen. No thank you. So having dealt with that, I'd now like to move on to our third point of clash. Is this policy necessary? And we say yes it is. The fact is terrorist organisations are incredibly complex, a lot more complex than organised crime, and they instigate a lot more harm. The fact is the complexity of these groups are international. They have links all over the world through codes, through things that take time to be broken down. And the fact is, due to the very basis that many of these people only know the person above them in the chain, ladies and gentlemen, it takes a lot of time to not just find the one person at the end of the chain, but to work out who everyone else is in the whole group and the whole network, and to be able to target them effectively. No thank you. We believe that as a result, because we need more time, and because we need more time to piece together the pieces from espionage and other arrests, no thank you, we believe that this tool should be reserved and should be there as a last resort, ladies and gentlemen. We're not accepting this idea that we're going to hold every single person in detention without trial needlessly. We believe that there will always be suspicion because there'll be no other reason why to do it. We believe that actually there is no reason to hold these people if it is proven that they are innocent. There are costs, there are the fact that they have to report to the courts within these situations, and that there are movements appealing for these people. And then because there is this pressure supporting those who are innocent, we believe that actually, ladies and gentlemen, those who are innocent will be released. They may be held for a while, but we say, no thank you, that's tough luck. They've done something that, ladies and gentlemen, that has given us a reason to hold them and to detain them. And if they're innocent, we will find that and we will release them. If they are guilty, or we think they are still guilty, we will hold them until we have enough evidence to find out whether they are guilty or not. So, ladies and gentlemen, they've said that we have all these other things, all this espionage, arrests and things, and they said Ellen hadn't dealt with this. Well, maybe they've missed it, but we believe that she did. Because she showed we have all these tools, we have all these things we can use, ladies and gentlemen, and we must reuse every single thing possible to stop these people. So, in summary, ladies and gentlemen, what have we shown you today? We've shown you why detention without trial is necessary to protect every single person in society against the harms that terrorism ship. We've shown you why, actually, it's kind of accepted within international law, within everyday work, that we sacrifice rights, ladies and gentlemen, and we can sacrifice this right in the sake of war. And we've shown how actually, by removing this tool, it just furthers terrorism, allows them a way of achieving their own purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have two sides here. We have a side that says we will sacrifice a bit of right for the protection for lives. Or we have something that says, no, we think that this is just something that should always be protected. And we've shown, ladies and gentlemen, that when we're dealing with war and someone who doesn't obey the rules, it shouldn't be. Thank you.
We're now going to have Ellen give us the reply on behalf of the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, in this debate we've heard a great deal of false dichotomies from the proposition. They don't seem to understand what the current situation is and why certain things are unique and exactly what the right the government has to take away our rights in certain cases. So in my summation, I'm going to try and clear these problems up by looking at three main areas of clash. I'm firstly going to look at exactly what is the status quo at the moment. I'm also going to look at whether terrorism is in fact a unique situation. And thirdly, I'm going to look at whether this policy is necessary. So firstly, what exactly is the status quo? And this is where we heard all these false dichotomies from Team Israel today. We got told that at the moment we're either grabbing aid workers in Afghanistan and throwing them in jail because their neighbour said they look shifty. Or we've got so much wonderful evidence that we're guaranteed we can take them to trial and get them convicted and get them put away to protect the public. And we say that's just not realistic, ladies and gentlemen. That is not what happens in society. What we see is that, funnily enough, there's a range of how much evidence people have. We say in order to deal with the public pressure that comes when you detain someone without trial, then they have to have some reasonable amount of evidence, and that they don't get away with just throwing people in jail with absolutely no evidence. We see that the abuses in Guantanamo Bay aren't wonderfully tolerated by the public as a whole. We all seem to know about them, and I doubt many people in the room condone them, and neither do either teams today. So we say that the police have to have they tend to have some evidence to want to convict them. The police don't tend to want to waste their time when they have targets to meet, they have people to protect, by arresting anyone they want to, or because they look a bit dodgy. What they want to do is to protect people and do their job properly by arresting someone who could potentially, because of some evidence, cause a great deal of harm in our society. And then there's another level of evidence they need then to be able to get a judge to agree to get and that's the level of evidence they need for the judge to give them more time. There's then another amount of evidence that they have to have in order to be able to hold them for a criminal trial. But there's yet more evidence, and this is the important bit, that they need to be able to get them convicted. And we are giving the police, under the status quo, every tool possible to try and make sure they get all the evidence they need to protect the public. We believe that torture in places such as Guantanamo Bay, no, they're not really a compulsory part of detention without trial. They're a problem with the system that we don't deal with by scrapping the system altogether, ladies and gentlemen. So let's look at whether terrorism is in fact a unique situation. Now, the proposition have told us that terrorism is like any other ordinary crime. And let's look at the analysis that they used to establish this. Serial killers hurt people, and terrorists hurt people. Serial killers are criminals, and therefore terrorists are criminals. Now, we're not quite happy with that level of analysis on the opposition today, because we've explained to you the distinction by looking at the nature of terrorism, how they create a climate of fear by attacking the whole state through individuals and trying to undermine it, and how they're an organised group, not like the mob that's out purely for their own benefit, that are out to destroy society and to take them down. And that is the difference, ladies and gentlemen. And it's a unique situation that we need these extra tools to deal with. So lastly, do we in fact need this policy? And this is where we heard what were described as alternatives from Team Israel, espionage and evidence. And we don't think those are really alternatives. We believe they complement the status quo, because this is what they use to get to the situation where they manage to realise that someone is possibly a terrorist. So we don't want to take away the final step and merely leave part of the status quo when we still think there are problems with it and it's not as successful as it could be as protecting the public. We also heard that there are problems with innocent people, and we've explained to you tough luck, because we want to protect the most people we possibly can. We think it's a shame, but we do recognise, we've said that the government takes away rights to protect the most people, and that's what's best overall. We've explained to you how the nature of terrorist organisations mean that 24 hours is not enough. And because when running out of time means people dying, we are unwilling to agree with the proposition, and we beg to protect society by opposing. Thank you.
But we will detain you.
Sorry, there's so much evidence on Bingo.
You're out of order. Right, ladies and gentlemen, moving swiftly on. This debate degenerates into a friendly conversation. Let's call on Moshe to give the proposition of life.
All right, hi everybody. Let's close this mother up. All right. I'm going to ask three main questions about this debate, which are basically going to take us back down to the core issues. Those three questions, which I'll get to in a moment, will be: first of all, is detention without a trial justified? Can we morally allow ourselves? Secondly, is detention without a trial necessary? And finally, are the harms of detention without a trial true? But before I go on to that, I'd just like to say one thing. It became clear by the end of this debate that what side opposition was essentially arguing for wasn't holding terrorists without a trial, because they agreed that it's important to give someone a trial and that all other criminals all other humans in our society deserve this right. All they were saying is that we need a little bit more time. We need 40 days instead of 24 hours. And we don't believe that this is really what they had to prove to us. They had to prove to us that it's all right for us to take these people into custody without any limits of time and not give them a trial, because that's status quo, and that's what detention without a trial means. It's not holding and not extending the time of the arrest to 40 days. So now that we've just pointed out that proposition sort of missed the point on the opposition, missed the point on that one, let's move on to the three main issues of the debate. Question number one: is detention without a trial morally justified? And now we explained to you very clearly why we don't take away these basic rights in our society for anyone, because it gives the government far too much power, because it opens the innocent civilians up, it opens them up to abuse. And the only justification that we heard from opposition was that terrorists are very dangerous, and therefore we're allowed to take away their rights, throw them into jail, throw away the key, simply because they're a big threat. But we told you, the mafia is a big threat. Serial killers are a big threat. Society is a very dangerous place. That doesn't justify us throwing our morals out the window. So we see that in this debate, the justification point, the morality point, falls on our side. So let's move on to the second way they try to justify their plan, by attempting to argue that we need detention without trial in order to save lives. They try to show that it's necessary. But is detention without trial necessary? And here we heard a contradiction from their side. Because on the one hand, we heard that we need to save these, we need incarceration without trial in order to save lives, because we don't have enough time currently to gather the evidence that would justify holding them until a trial. But then, in the same breath, we heard that we will only take these people into custody once we have strong evidence against them. And ladies and gentlemen, we have to ask, if we were only going to take them into custody once we have strong evidence against them, then let's use that evidence, take it to a judge, and ask the judge to allow us to hold them until a trial, ladies and gentlemen, because a trial is the only fair way to decide if someone can stay in prison or not. And once again, if there is a threat, let's hold them until the trial, ladies and gentlemen. Let's not send them out onto the street. Let's hold them in prison until we can judge them fairly, until we can try them. And once again, I'd just like to stress that we didn't hear why the alternatives weren't enough. Why isn't it enough, ladies and gentlemen, to spy on a suspect, to stake out his house, to follow around his car, and if we see he's on his way to an attack, then we arrest him, ladies and gentlemen. But we don't act on our vague suspicions, throw innocents into prison without a trial. And finally, to sum up this debate, I'd like to refocus it a little. Because the opposition kept on talking about terrorists. And that's really only part of what this debate is about. Because what actively happens when we have a policy of detention without trial is that innocents are detented, ladies and gentlemen. Innocents are put away for years. That's what happened in Guantanamo Bay, whether the opposition likes it or not. That's what happens in Israel a lot of the time, and that's not something we can allow. Detention without trial leads to vast abuse and is simply unnecessary, and therefore, we can't allow it. Thank you.
Do you want us to give you the room for the discussion?